Welcome everybody to the 7th iteration of the Eastern Region Mentoring Navy Public Affairs Group. I'm your host, Lieutenant Commander Teresa Carpenter. I am one of 2 regional co-mentors along with Commander Charlie Dre. And this is our 7th iteration of our Regional Mentoring Group webinar. We used to do these meetings in person, but we've adapted in a COVID world. And every month we provide webinars on issues of professional development that are of interest to the Navy public affairs community. So today I'm extremely excited. I have a very special guest to talk with us today about information related capabilities, IO, MISO, Intel, information professionals, and how we best work with those individuals. So before our guest begins to speak, I want to give a little bit about his background. He is a Navy commander, Ben Tisdale. He's from Woodstock, Georgia. He commissioned as a Navy Public Affairs officer in 2005. He served at Cyber Command. He served as the Deputy PAO for Navy Special Warfare Command. He was the Deputy Chief of Communications at U.S. Central Command, a media action officer at U.S. Fleet Forces Command. He's deployed twice to Afghanistan as an Afghan hand in support of Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Freedom Centennial. He was an advisor to Afghanistan's Assistant Minister of Defense for Strategic Communications, the Office of the President, and the National Security Council. He is an APR plus M. He's also won in 2018 the San Diego State University Rear Admiral T. McCreary Jr. Public Affairs Alumni Award and holds an APR plus M. In addition to all that, he has also been awarded a information warfare qualification as an IWO, Information Warfare Officer. So I'm re-recording this intro because it did not make it into the recording. So the first question that I had asked Ben, that I'll cut to here in just a second, was how his introduction to other information related capabilities got started and what got him on the path to want to learn more about everybody in the public affairs community who, well, outside of the public affairs community, I mean, who do information related capabilities. So with that, I hope you guys enjoyed the session.
A funny story with that. I was preparing for a deployment with a SEAL team back in 2011, and there was an IO cell, and I was a very junior PAO, and I knew nothing really about what information operations meant. But, you know, working with SEALs, sometimes you have to kind of puff your chest a little bit and act like you know what you're talking about. So during a brief, I talked about the integration of PA and IO, and afterwards, this SEAL Master Chief very candidly pulled me aside and said, "Hey, buddy, I want you to read JP 3 Tech 1.3 because it's clear to me that you have no idea what you're talking about." And I said, "Roger that, Master Chief." And so it was through that really kind of began my, I guess, journey into the information operations doctrine, so to speak. And then when I worked in Afghanistan years later, I definitely saw a lot of different organizations and people who were involved in communication, maybe not necessarily PAOs, but particularly like for MISO operators, etc. I saw that. I saw that at CENTCOM, and believe it or not, I also saw it at Fleet Cyber Command. So I've seen it in a lot of different places, and every place I've been, though, it's just been a little bit different.
So what would you say in all of your experiences in working with these type of entities, did you find to be the most harmonious relationship? Where do you think there was points of coordination, and where did you see points of friction?
So in Afghanistan, the way that they had, the way that they integrated different communication programs was under a Deputy Chief of Staff for Communication. And it was a 1-star position. And underneath him, it was an Army 1-star. He had public affairs, he had KLE, he had legislative affairs, he had PA, he had PA advisors, which that was the team or cell that I was a part of. and then he actually had IO. Now IO, the way that they were operating would probably better be described as MISO, but that was all timed under one star. And conceptually, I'd say it worked pretty well. Although, just like with any other staff, there's always that day-to-day friction a little bit. The MISO folks and our team had to coordinate a lot in terms of what they were doing, what the Afghans were doing. And sometimes people didn't necessarily know who was doing what or why. And sometimes messages weren't really synced, or sometimes the messages were just not that great quality. So it wasn't perfect, but the nice thing about being under one person and one organization is that we talked on
Yes.
a
Yeah.
pretty routine basis. So it worked as best as it probably could.
Right. I think that for the people who don't understand the MISO aspect and the IO, can you give a little bit of more explanation about that? Because I think a lot of people, like you said in a post on the Navy Communicators page, a lot of people look at IO and they think IO does messaging. But I know it's a lot more broad than that. And MISO is just one aspect of it. So can you describe what MISO is compared to IO as a whole?
Yeah, and let me tackle that in reverse order. Let me tackle the IO piece and then talk about MISO. So uh, the term IO has evolved actually a little bit over the last 10 years. So now, well, let me step back. So back in 2012, IO was defined as the integrated employment of electronic warfare, cyberspace operations, military information support operations, MISO, operations security, and military deception, bring them together in order to compromise, degrade, destroy, however you want to phrase it, the enemy's decision-making capability, whether human or automated, while protecting our own. So MISO was a small slice of that. Back in about 2014, that evolution, that term evolved to what we have today, and that's all IRCs. So it's not just the core five anymore, it's everybody else. So MISO is a part of IO in that it's meant to influence foreign audiences with selected information in order to get them to change some sort of behavior in order to be favorable to U.S. interests, or favorable in a way that compromises the enemy's decision-making capabilities. So that's the difference. And again, the reason why I think that the definition was expanded was because at the time the SecDef wanted to ensure that IO was focused on what are the desired effects, what are we trying to achieve. In some theaters, when it comes to IO, MISO will play a very, very heavy role. And then in other theaters, let's say cyber, for example, particularly if you're trying to compromise an information system, it's going to be more on the cyberspace side. So, but it doesn't really matter. Again, it's about the desired outcomes of what you're trying to achieve.
Right. And I think that sometimes PA doesn't really know, or I know when I was a very junior PAO, I went to just SOTA P. And we had people that were working Joint Special Operations Task Force Philippines, and they were working MISO. But the MISO guys basically just traveled with the civil affairs guys, and they would hand out leaflets and flyers. And there wasn't a whole lot of coordination with the junior PAOs. I mean, it was all under the same JSOTA P mission, and there wasn't any kind of information practice where, you know, there was conflicting information exactly. There just wasn't coordination to make sure that the messages were aligned. Can you give some examples, and because I just haven't seen it, and maybe other people on the call haven't seen it, of the ways in which you've seen MISO do their radio broadcasts or their leaflets or some of their products, and then done those in complementary ways with the public affairs teams? Have you seen that?
Yeah, so, and I'm sorry to rely on Afghanistan, but in Afghanistan, that it would ebb and flow. And one of the challenges there in that kind of theater is people are constantly coming and going. You know, deployments are pretty short for some folks. Sometimes it's 6 months, sometimes a year. It just depends. And so like on my 2 deployments, I would see something like this. The MISO folks would put out some sort of posters or leaflets, it would offend the Afghans, or it wasn't coordinated enough. So we would all get together. We as PA advisors would bring in the MISO operators and meet with the Afghans. The Afghans would provide their feedback on how to better tailor their products to resonate better with the Afghans. The MISO operators would say, Roger that, make adjustments to what they were doing. And then the Afghans, of course, they have their own public affairs and MISO capabilities, and they would all sync. But as time would go on, people leave or whatnot, and we'd have to relearn those lessons all over again. So, but I think the key is really the personalities and just trying to understand really what everybody else is doing. In the scenario like you brought up, that's a good example of normally how it can sometimes look.
Mm-hmm. And it can be frustrating too, because a lot of people really don't understand that IO is this larger piece to MISO. It's not just the MISO aspect. Were there any prohibitions on what you could do versus what the MISO guys could do?
As a PA advisor
Mm-hmm.
there, actually, nothing's jumping to mind. I will say, ironically, there was a point where the IO team did have Army IO advisors, but there came a point that the billets were gapped,
Mm-hmm.
and they asked me to step in to be the IO advisor for the Afghan National Army. And I was very, very blunt. I said, hey, I can help with messaging and informing. I'm not really that skilled when it comes to MISO and influence operations, but I will definitely try. And oh, by the way, IO is something much bigger, right? So I don't really have that skill set, but I'll try.
Right, right.
But to answer your question directly, I can't remember anything specifically that we weren't allowed to do, but I will say that there were definitely things that were very effective and some things that were not effective at all in Afghanistan, and just trying to make sure everybody understood that and everybody was on the same page so we could be more effective was really important.
How did the coordination go with the State Department as you were doing these events?
So at the time I was there, the 2 deployments spread over 14, 15, and 16. The State Department, they were helpful from like a policy, from a strategic level, and just informing them what we were doing and they informing us. But the difference was for them, they had a lot of restrictions physically on being able to go out and meet with their Afghan partners. We, on the other hand, had a lot more freedom to engage our Afghan partners on site at the Ministry of Defense or wherever they were at, and they didn't have that. So the State Department oftentimes relied on us as DoD advisors to get whatever they wanted to share with the Afghans or ask the Afghans to help them do something. They went through us.
Do you have any example, and then we'll get off Afghanistan because I do want to talk about your cyber experience as well and your IWC opportunity. But do you have any particular examples or a good case study of when you worked with MISO, or you worked kind of across the IRCs? It doesn't even just have to be MISO, and you put together a communication campaign and you achieved really good success by coordinating across the IRCs.
Yeah, so I think again, with Afghanistan particularly, there were certainly some operations that we participated with where, and again, I was acting more as an advisor, not as a PAO, where I was, at Resolute Support Headquarters pushing messages. I was sort of working with the Afghans to encourage them to put out particular messages. There were some operations that we did, particularly against the Taliban, that we could tell that the messages were synchronized and we worked well together as a team. The ANA put out truthful messaging about an operation, and MISO was able to do some social media and also some leaflet activities that supported that. So it has happened, but it didn't always.
It doesn't always work.
Obviously.
Exactly. And sometimes I know it's harder to talk about the bad case studies than it is to talk about the good ones, but it really does. I think the thing that I keyed in on in listening to you is that it really is all about the relationships and having that emotional intelligence to understand what their objectives are, meaning what is the IO's team planners objectives? What do they want out of their time and their investment? And then what is the MISO and what are they trying to get out of their, any other IRC? Like what are they trying to achieve? What effect? And can that effect be complemented by the things that PA is doing? In fact, this gets into another question that we hear a lot about dominating the narrative. That's sometimes this lovely phrase that I'll hear operators say. And what is it your response when people tell you or they say, PAO, we want you to dominate the narrative? What is your response to that?
So that's probably a whole nother topic, but I try not to use the word dominating. I'm of the mind that we are one voice out of many. There are ways that I think we can influence the information environment maybe faster than our adversaries, and I think that's why speed is really important. I also think credibility is another issue. That's why it's important that we always maintain the truth. So we make ourselves a more powerful voice in the information environment, but I try to avoid dominating because I just don't know how you measure that. And if you can't really measure it, then I can't really guarantee you that that we've done that.
Absolutely. That's a great point about measuring it. I never thought about it like that. I just thought it was sort of an aggressive word to use, but
no, it sounds cool for sure. Sounds amazing.
Yes. But you're right. Like, I don't know how you measure whether or not you've dominated an information landscape or not. So, so moving, trying to switching gears to sort of your cyber experience. What was that like to go to Cyber Command? I think it was called Cyber Command when you were there, right?
Fleet Cyber Command, 10th Fleet. So it is a service component to U.S. Cyber Command. So just like the other geographic combatant commands, like we the Navy, we're the service component, and to boot, so to speak, the Navy's Fleet Cyber also serves as the cryptologic service component to the NSA. I will say it was a really eye-opening experience. There was a lot of terminology, a lot of doctrine that I was totally 110% unfamiliar with. And so I had a lot to learn. And I was also surrounded by the Navy information warfare community. So cryptologic warfare officers, information professionals, intelligence officers, out of a massive command, there was only one 1650, while everybody else was pretty much an 1800 series. So that was a trip. Yeah, it was great.
So is that what inspired you to go for your IWC pin? What was the genesis? What made you decide to go and try to do that? In fact, when no one else in our community had ever done it before.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So there's probably some people out there who who definitely have tried. I know Joel Holstead, who held the position a while back, had tried to get it before. I was just in some ways pretty lucky. There was a waiver process in the information warfare qualification program for people who maybe have done like IO type things in the past, as well as working in an IW related command. So I was able to get that. But really why I did it, to be honest with you, was I was coming off the heels of AFPAC Hands. And the AFPAC Hands program, I mean, it was awesome. And I'm sure you're seeing this now in your current job. I was well trained before I went on my first deployment in Afghanistan. I had an 8-month workup cycle where I wasn't learning just how to shoot guns and drive MRAPs, but I was also spent 4 months learning Dari and actually learning the language and learning the culture of Afghanistan. So when I got there, I felt well prepared. When I got to Fleet Cyber, I felt like literally the biggest idiot in the world because I had no idea what was going on. And so I was talking to my chief of staff one day, Captain James Mills, a great IP officer. And he said, hey, if you're feeling frustrated and you want to learn, if you want a systematic, methodical way to learn about our community, let's get you into the information warfare qualification system. And I said, hey, roger that, let's do it. And it took a while to get approval from Naval Information Forces, NAVI-4, but eventually they said, okay, we'll let you do it. And yeah, about 8 months from there, I was able to board. And
Wow.
again, it was a lot of fun.
And what a great way to learn about your craft. If you're not going to go into that billet understanding the same type of information that everybody else already had due to their background, the fact that they had this qualification program that you could enter, I'm sure made you more of an asset to the team after you were qualified as well, because you could sit through a meeting and understand the terminology or understand some of the things that they were working on or doing, because you had to learn that through that qualification process, correct?
No, absolutely. And it helped me not just within the organization itself, but also speaking with people outside of the organization, whether that be CHINFO or other fleet PAOs, like trying to relate to them, hey, like this is what's going on, or this is why 10th Fleet is doing this. It's, you know, I didn't know everything, still don't, but at least I felt more confident, and also that I could at least keep up with what they want to do. And if you don't mind, I'll give you a great example that just happened to me yesterday.
Oh, absolutely.
So there was a discussion at my command yesterday about a particular type of routine message we put out to CellRes, and whether or not it meets, you know, whether or not there's some concerns about OPSEC. And because of what I learned through the IW qualification process, you know, I learned the 5-step OPSEC process very well, and I recognized some gaps in the analysis. So, you know, I let the other officers know. I said, hey, in accordance with this instruction, and I had it, you know, with me yesterday. It was an NTTP. I said, hey, according to this, you know, we need to do this for step 4. We need to verify that this is critical information that we're actually discussing, and then we need to actually do like a risk-based analysis and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, everybody was like, oh my gosh, you know, and it really kind of, I hate to say it, kind of shut down the conversation. And, but so those are the moments I'm like, man, I'm really glad I did that qualification, because it really helps me in moments like that. Because otherwise, you know, we would have probably spent way too much time on that.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
Well, that's definitely testament to the idea that knowledge is power. And when you are empowered to have that knowledge, there's things that just become a lot easier, and people aren't flailing because somebody understands what the policy is or what the procedures are. So taking that time to educate yourself is always a bonus. And it is why I encourage people to get the APR. Same kind of mindset, but applied to a different thing that you have also done as well. And think it's, and I do, and just giving it a little plug.
That's awesome.
Yes. But what would you say to people who are, let's say, even on the very, like the junior officers that are, you know, butting heads with their senior enlisted SEA? Because what I found when I go to an amphib or a carrier, and as many of our PAOs will do, they'll either go to an amphib or a carrier, or like myself, go to both. You find that your internal communications program is often needing to be coordinated with more than just your PAO shop and your CO or your XO. A lot of times your CMC or the spouse network or some of these other communication related actors will have a stake in your program, and will often be doing their own communications program. And sometimes they won't tell you what they're doing, or you'll find out at the last minute that they're doing some event that would have been good for PAO to be a part of, or the FRG will put something out on Facebook that, you know, they didn't coordinate with the public affairs about. And now you're getting sailors asking you questions. I'm just using those as some examples to take it out of the, you know, IO or the, you know, the warfighter world, and say this also applies to even people who work on the base. There's so many other information actors who do things at the base level. What has been your, I guess, best practice when you're working with other information related actors who aren't informing you of some of the things that they're doing?
Oh man, that's another great question. I'm sure just about everybody on this line and everybody watching has probably experienced this. Gosh, I think that Admiral Green, who I used to work for at Naval Special Warfare Group 1, had a great saying. He said, control what you can control. And it had a double meaning. Obviously what you can control, go after it, own it, and shape it. But what you can't, you got to learn how to let it go. And so, whether it was at CENTCOM or aboard the Ike, 10th Fleet or whatnot, if there were other people kind of doing, in so to speak, as you said, my internal communication space, the first thing I would always try to do is meet with them and understand their roles and responsibilities a little bit, and also understand, perhaps what their supervisor or the commander is asking them to do, right? Just try to understand what they're trying to achieve, and see if we can't find ways to work together. And, maybe perhaps even sort of say, hey, well, this is where I can provide you some value.
Yep.
Doesn't always work, right? Because I think, to be fair, particularly in the situations you talked about, FRG and ombudsman or whatnot, that's an even more difficult situation, because they are not necessarily in the military chain of command at all. So there's really no way to really control that a whole lot. But yeah, I think it's just, like you said, just meeting down and just kind of setting those expectations.
And then what would you say about some of the contracted SC? Have you had a lot of experience with any of those individuals at any of your commands?
Yeah, do you mean like StratCom professionals or?
Correct. So a lot of times at the COCOMs, there'll be people who come in who do strategic communications, and a lot of times they'll run working groups and they'll advise the boss directly. And
Yeah.
I saw it as a very junior PAO, so I didn't necessarily have the same situational awareness on what they were doing as, let's say, my 05s and 06s at the time did. But I found it to be interesting that they were running all these working groups and putting together all these slides and advising the commander, but they didn't necessarily have access to any of the tactics or any of, like you said, any of the tools that we have to very quickly get out the message. So I don't know if you've had any experience working with them, or maybe somebody on the call when we get to the Q&A can share a good case study on that, on how that synchronization can work well.
Yeah, I've seen that relationship between StratCom and PA come in 3 different flavors. One flavor is that the StratCom professional, typically like an SES or whatnot, they have a good working relationship with public affairs, at least the director of. They speak with each other to say, hey, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and its feeling is good. That's rare. Normally what I've seen is, and I love to do, if I was really bored one day, I'd love to do a paper on this because it's really fascinating dynamic. More times than not, what I see is that the StratCom professional has, works directly for a 4-star.
Yes.
And
Chief of staff. Yep.
Really has that person's ear, and attempts to try to task the director of PA. And it can create a very contentious relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third flavor is they don't speak at all. And I don't think 3 is healthy. I don't think 2 is healthy. I don't think any, senior 06, Navy captain, colonel, etc., basically likes to be told by someone who's not necessarily their reporting senior how to do their business. I think the first flavor is really ideal, but that's really predicated, I think, on the personalities of both individuals, as well as what the expectations are for both individuals. At CENTCOM, we had that type of situation where we had, a StratCom professional and we had director of communication integration. And it worked really well, I think, once those 2 individuals actually got on the same page in terms of differentiating like roles and responsibilities, and even with a level of humility, the PAO saying, hey, this is what I can offer to you, or this is what I can do to help you and your mission, so to speak. So
Absolutely.
an olive branch goes a long way.
Yeah, and I think that's all that you can do. The COCOMs want to see communication synchronized across all the IRCs. They don't want to see that it's just one or the other. They want to see that it's, a synchronization effect across many different communicators. And I think that's why they come in. They come in because the commander is seeing that there's more than just the PAO who does communications, and they want to see some sort of a synchronization. And you have to do your best to support that. That's my attitude. And you're right. That's where I think I've seen it work best. At INDOPACOM, I think we were in category number 1. My boss was very aware of everything that they were doing, and the SC folks were constantly visiting us and telling us what they were doing, getting our input on things. So I think that is the best way that we can work with them. But I can see, like you said, because we don't work for them, they don't work for us, but we're all kind of doing communications activities, it can turn into a very contentious relationship and a very controversial issue. And the best thing that we can do, like you said, you can control what you can control. And if our 4-star, 3-star, 2-star, whoever thinks that these extra folks are important and integral to the staff, then it is our duty as good public affairs officers to work best with them and serve his or her mission the best way we know how. So I agree with you. I think that is the best way to approach that issue. Is there anything else that I didn't cover down on that you want to address before we get into the Q&A?
Yeah, and it's more of a kind of just a recommendation for Navy PAOs when working with the Navy information warfare community. My favorite folks. Just a couple of pieces of advice. I know as a PAO, sometimes it can be frustrating because people think they know what it is that we do, or essentially tell us how to do our business. And it can probably be a little bit professionally frustrating for all of us. Misery loves company, and I'd say that that's very true of the entire information warfare community. Cryptologic warfare officers, IPs, intel, people just assume they think they know what they do. So we're kind of in that little boat together. So, just understand that, and understand that we're not the only community that has to deal with that problem. When working with IO, I'd also say that if you find yourself in an IO cell somewhere, always remember that it's about the desired outcomes. Like, don't get so hung up on, like if the MISO guys in a carrier strike group, ask you to help print out leaflets, like remember what the outcomes are. Always hold to our principles of information, always, but also be flexible in what kind of services you provide to our Navy partners. And then the last thing is, really study. And it really goes back to that hard lesson I learned with that Navy SEAL, in that, hey, I pretended essentially to know what I was talking about, and I got crushed. But it was because of that I went back and I actually read the JP and understood, where I went wrong, and became better because of that. So I think studying, especially other joint pubs, what we do as PAOs, the PAO PQS, the APR plus M, all these things are so important because it helps us to be better professionals. And I'll get off my soapbox, Teresa, and I'll take any questions you or the rest of the group might have.
Okay. Well, I think I've expired all the questions that I have. So at this point, I just want to turn it over to the people we have on the call. I see some faces and see some phone numbers. So just opening it up for anyone who might have a question.
I have one. I'll go ahead and ask, and I'll be honest, I'll probably reach out to you later for more one-on-one assistance with this too. But based on either your experience in Afghanistan or maybe elsewhere, can you tell me what relationship you've had with our coalition partners when it comes to working across IWCs to reach some of these desired outcomes? And is there any maybe disconnect because there's certain entities that are not leading the effort for our allies that are leading the effort here in the U.S. Navy?
Teresa, you want to take that one, or I'm happy to take it.
That is a tough one. So you're basically asking the information disconnects when working with our foreign partners? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, and specifically when you guys, like I have a very specific goal in mind here. I'm preparing for some operational tasking. And as part of that, we're going to be working, we did some red team co-analysis already with how we would respond if said country does whatever. And now we're going to bring in our coalition partners into that discussion after I've already worked with the information warfare commander and his team on that. So now I'm wondering, what things do I need to keep in mind as I go to work with my allies? Are they going to say, nope, we only care about this. We're not interested in these types of other IO operations that are going on. We only want to talk public affairs, or we only want to put out a press release, or we don't want to even dabble into that territory because my counterpart in the UK, for example, may not be as well nested with their IRC counterparts.
Right. And this goes back to what Ben said about control what you can control. I mean, I remember when I was in, Philippines is where I've spent the most time, and working with foreign partners. And I can remember that they basically just had the reporters on text message, and they would just text message back and forth their answers, and they would send them cell phone photos of what was going on. And they didn't have any big approval process. They didn't have to go through anybody to get their information out there. And they could be a lot more, let's say, they were just able to communicate more freely with people than what we could be doing, especially considering what our mission was at the time. So what I learned is that I would share with them all of our products. And another good example was when I was in India, they wanted me to make sure that the Indian counterparts approved all my product. They didn't care about approving my product. I was like, okay, I'll let them know. And then I got them on an email writing me back, which I CC'd 7th Fleet and the State Department on, saying, go ahead and put everything out that you'd like to put out. You can just add us to your distro if you'd like. And so I have to just kind of work with people, meet them where they're at, and then make sure that I'm letting my higher headquarters know, or whoever it is you're working with across the IRCs, exactly what their responses are and where you're at with that coordination. And that's all you can do, because you can't expect a foreign partner to align perfectly with what you're doing. However, you have to ensure that not only your chain of command knows what's going on, but that 7th Fleet or 3rd Fleet or 5th Fleet or whoever your higher headquarters PAOs. That's another thing about, we have that lovely dual chain of making sure that we let the fleet know and let our boss know. So that would be my advice, is I just make sure everybody knows what I'm doing, and understand that they may not have the same communication approach that we do. Ben, over to you. Did I miss anything?
Yeah, no, that's really solid advice. Desiree, I'd add to that. One of the hardest things I had to learn when I was in Afghanistan, working particularly with NATO and particularly the UK, is that their approach to IO and the relationship with PA is very different than our own understanding. I'd say the apprehension of PA to work in IO is not there within NATO and UK. So you may be surprised that any type of apprehension may not be there, but to Teresa's point, keeping everybody informed on what you're doing is certainly critical. I would also, again, the key to good IO is getting on the same page with what the desired outcomes or effects are of what you want to do, and figuring out like how you can work together to get there, and what IRC makes the most sense to do X in order to get to that desired outcome.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I hope that helps. Okay, cool.
Anybody else have a question?
Hey, it's Amelia. I have a question, but I wanted to add something to Desiree's question. I found in 6th Fleet, when we would do some exercises, even though the U.S. would be lead for it, we wouldn't dictate that we had PA lead, and we wouldn't try to assume that we would be approving any other country's public affairs statements or products. But it did seem for certain exercises, even with NATO allies, that they would be looking to us to provide some of that guidance. And so I think, that might be something that might come up, is they might be looking at you to approve things when you really need to say, well, I think like Teresa said, is you just kind of need to be ready to lay out what your plan is and what you intend to do. And really what you're looking for from them is to make sure that you're not offending anybody on their side,
Mhm.
I think. But and I also have heard that some of the other countries, there is much more blending between PA and IO. And so, whereas we are very concerned about ensuring that we are truthful and accurate, I don't necessarily think that all the other countries have the same perspective on that. And so you might see some messaging from them that might seem odd to you as a public affairs officer, because that would not be something that you would put out. But looking forward to seeing what you have. Ben, my question for you is, most of the time I find like every job that we go to as public affairs officers are just wildly different. And so we spend a lot of time figuring out like, what is the purpose of my command? What is it that we do so that you can effectively communicate it? And hearing your bio and the places that you've been to, what are some ways that you found, how can you kind of speed up that process? How can you, figure out what's going on, get the reassurances from the other ACOSs or whatever that you know what you're talking about, so that you can confidently then come in and provide that guidance to the boss without seeming like you don't know what's going on? What are your tips and tricks, I would say?
Yeah, so a couple of things. That's a great question. I appreciate it. First, I love to read. And, the first thing I'll try to do if a command has a SORM, I'll read it. I'll try to understand what the exact roles and responsibilities are. And that's usually the first step. If they don't have that, the closest thing that I can find to that. I've been really lucky in that some of my commands have like their own culture. So like for 10th Fleet, there's a past of cryptology. For Naval Special Warfare, the SEAL community, right? So it's very easy to find books on, written about, famous people, so to speak, within those communities, or, legends or whatnot, and just kind of extracting from those readings, like, okay, these are the things that this community particularly values. I think that's super helpful. And then also too, it may seem a little weird, but reading your commands and instructions on different topics or whatnot, especially here at the Navy Reserve Force, that's the only way that I've been able to understand how to manage, cell res, so to speak, or at least how the command is trying to manage cell res. I'm not trying to be an expert on all those things, but at the same time, I want to be competent in those conversations. So I guess to recap, find the documentation that specifies what your command does. Read about the culture of your command, if that type of literature is out there. And then the third thing, start getting the nitnoids of, I guess, the command instructions of what your command is actually like, the programs and whatnot.
And just to add on to what Ben said, one of the things that I find very helpful, and I'll just give a shout out to, and her last name escapes me, but the Nimitz PAO, Liza Doughty, Doughert. Anyway, I'm going to credit her with it because it's the first time I've ever seen anyone do it. But she has a 5720, which is a public affairs instruction communications plan. Now she did one for her strike group and she did one for her ship. And we all are taught through APR and plus M to do comms plans, but we're not taught to get them signed by the boss. And I think the fact that, she took the time after being there for some amount of months and doing exactly what Ben said, she read those command instructions. She studied, her command and observed what their objectives and their mission were. And then she sat down and just wrote out an overarching comms plan. I mean, of course, she's going to have separate comms plans for campaigns and other things. But, when I go back to, I'm not in a regular command right now. But if I end up going back to, a fleet forces or a numbered fleet or wherever, I intend to have an overarching, if I can, comms plan that's signed by my boss. Because I think that sets some boundaries, and it's something that can also be updated and revised, but it lets the staff know how you're going to work with other IRCs, how you're going to prioritize what it is that you want to work on, and what your role is. So if anyone wants to know what PAO brings to the table, you've got this thing in writing that you can only have, like Ben said, after you've done some research.
It's a great question.
It really is. Thank you. So if we don't have any other questions, we're nearing the top of the hour. So appreciate it for everyone who's stayed on the call. I really am honored to be in this position and to be able to do these calls. I may be going downrange. So I'm in talks with someone. I will leave it to be determined about someone to help share these duties for next month. Although we have an amazing speaker lined up. Jody Cornell is going to be talking about influencers and how we gain traction with influencers. She was able to snag a very prominent influencer on YouTube who has been doing a lot of good work for the submarine community. So that has been a very successful relationship, and kind of how she got that relationship started and why, and the dividends that that's been giving even years after it happened. Ben, do you have any closing remarks before we end the call?
No, other than just, again, I really appreciate you setting this up. It's been a PAO now for, gosh, almost 14, 15 years now. And just to see the level of professionalism like throughout our community, especially through forums like this, has just been so amazing. And I really appreciate you spearheading it, Teresa. And that's all I got.
Thank you, Ben. Mentoring is very important. So, if you can be a mentor or you can mentor others, do it. It's so rewarding on both ends. We learn from reverse mentoring as well. We learn from the junior people just as much as we do the seniors. So please reach out to me if you need a mentor or you'd like to be a mentor. Thank you all for joining. I'm going to sign off on the call now.